Hello PEI. Welcome to our deep dive into what the future holds for residential growth right here on the island. We've got a lot to unpack today. And a huge thanks to Mike Montague, RE/MAX Charlottetown for both sponsoring and doing the research for this deep dive. Everywhere you look these days, it seems like there's a new construction project. PEI is in a period of growth. But what does it all mean for you? Well, that's what we're here to find out today.
That's right, and we're going to look at it from a few different angles, so we can try to give you the best possible view of everything that's happening. We're going to be looking at the PEI government's guidelines for building and development, and then we'll zoom in on two specific projects that are really making waves: the East-West Housing Corridor in Summerside, and a development called the Crossroads in Stratford.
So from the nuts and bolts of building permits to these big visionary projects that could reshape entire communities, I'm really interested to see how this all connects.
Yeah, should be interesting. Speaking of nuts and bolts, let's start with those building permits. I know government guidelines might seem a little dry at first glance, but they actually have a lot of useful information for anyone who's even thinking about building on PEI.
Okay, so let's say I'm a listener and I have this great idea for a new house. What is the first thing I need to know?
Well, the first thing to understand is that you'll likely need two permits: a development permit and a building permit. You can think of the development permit as like the big picture permission. It's all about how your project fits into the overall land use plan for the area. And they consider things like zoning and environmental impact.
So making sure that my dream home doesn't accidentally end up in the middle of a nature preserve.
Exactly. And then the building permit, that's the permit that's all about the actual construction. It's there to make sure that the structure itself is safe and that it meets all the building codes.
Okay, so two different permits, two different focuses. Is there anything else that would be really important for someone to know before they start planning?
One thing that trips people up is setbacks. Setbacks refer to the minimum distance your structure needs to be from things like property lines, roads, and water.
So that's why I can't build my sunroom right on the edge of my property.
Exactly. Those setbacks are there for a number of important reasons: fire safety, privacy, and even just making sure that your house looks good in the neighborhood. Now, the specific rules around setbacks can differ depending on where you're building, so it's always best to check the specific setback guidelines for your municipality.
Got it. So all this information is laid out in the government's guidelines.
It is. And they even have this really handy online tool where you can check the status of permits, which can be super helpful when you're in the middle of the process and maybe feeling a little anxious about timelines.
That's fantastic. No more calling over and over trying to get an update. We've been focusing on the smaller details. But I want to get your take on the bigger picture. What did these guidelines tell us about PEI's approach to development?
Well, I think it shows a real commitment to responsible growth. There's a clear emphasis on balancing individual property rights with the needs of the community and the environment as a whole. It's not just about building houses, it's about building a sustainable future for the island.
Absolutely. And speaking of building for the future, let's move on and talk about some of these specific projects that are capturing everyone's attention. First, we have the East-West Housing Corridor in Summerside. This project has been making headlines, and for good reason. It could bring over 2,000 new housing units to the city. I mean, that's a game changer, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a huge development. What I think is fascinating about this project is that it's been in the works for over 2 decades. Originally, it started as a traffic flow solution, the East-West connector, they called it. But as the island has grown, it's evolved into something much bigger. Now it's not just about easing congestion, it's about creating entirely new neighborhoods.
Okay, so over 2,000 new housing units. That's a lot of new people potentially moving into Summerside. What kind of an impact do you think this will have?
Well, it's certainly going to put pressure on existing infrastructure and services. We could see a pretty significant population increase, so things like schools, healthcare facilities, and traffic management will need to be carefully considered.
That makes sense. It's not enough to just build houses. You need to build a community that can support that kind of growth.
You got it. And from what I've seen, it seems like the developers and city planners are very aware of these challenges. They're talking about a phased approach to make sure that infrastructure keeps pace with development. They're also emphasizing a mix of housing types to try and attract a wide range of residents.
So it's not just a bunch of identical houses and hoping for the best. They're really trying to create a dynamic and thriving community.
Yeah, they're taking a much more thoughtful approach. And that's reflected in some of the design elements. They're really focused on walkability, green spaces, and a mix of residential and commercial development, creating a place where people can live, work, and play without needing to use their cars so much.
That sounds like a huge shift from the traditional suburban model. Anything else about this project that stands out to you?
Well, one thing is that they really seem to be emphasizing community engagement. The developers have been holding these public consultations and gathering feedback from residents. They seem genuinely committed to creating a development that reflects what the community wants and needs.
That's really encouraging to hear. It sounds like the east-west housing corridor is going to have a positive impact on Summerside for years to come.
From Summerside, we're heading over to Stratford, where a project called the Crossroads is generating a lot of buzz.
Okay, so what makes the Crossroads so different?
Well, the first thing is the timeline. This is a 15 to 20-year project. It's not about making a quick buck. This is a long-term vision for what a community can be. The Gray Group, the developers, are aiming to transform over 100 acres, right in the heart of Stratford, into this mixed-use hub with residential, commercial, and even light industrial spaces.
They're basically building a mini city in Stratford.
I guess you could say that. It's really all about creating a sense of place. They're including a central urban park, walking trails, a multi-use cycling lane. They want to make nature and active living an important part of this development.
So it's not just about the buildings, it's about the lifestyle. What else have they said about the Crossroads?
Affordability is another key part of the project. They're looking into affordable housing units and assisted living facilities, which is so important given how tough the housing market is right now.
That's great to hear. It sounds like they want to create a community that's open to everyone. Traffic can be a problem with big developments like this. Have they talked about how they'll manage that?
They have, and they have a really interesting approach. They're designing the access points to minimize the impact on existing residential areas. Plus, they're building almost 3 kilometers of new roads within the project itself to help keep traffic flowing smoothly.
Smart.
Well, their slogan is growing the town up, not out, which suggests a focus on density rather than sprawl, which is good for the environment. They're also exploring alternative energy sources and using green building practices. Plus, all that parkland and green space really makes it seem like they're committed to creating a development that fits in with the natural environment.
It all sounds really promising. Anything else our listeners should know about the Crossroads?
It's important to remember that this is a long-term plan. We're talking about 15 to 20 years before it's all built out. It'll be really interesting to see how things evolve over time. The vision they've laid out is definitely compelling, though.
It definitely gives us a lot to think about.
It does, and it reflects some of the bigger trends that we're seeing in residential development, not just on PEI, but across the country. People are looking for communities that are compact, walkable, and that offer a good mix of housing types and amenities.
It sounds like it's about creating a sense of place, a sense of community.
Exactly. That's exactly what the East-West Corridor and the Crossroads seem to be aiming for. They're incorporating green spaces, walking trails, and that blend of residential and commercial development, trying to create vibrant hubs where people can live, work, and play without having to always rely on cars.
Which is a huge plus these days with gas prices and the environment.
Oh, absolutely. And that actually speaks to another big trend, incorporating sustainability principles into development. We're seeing more and more emphasis on energy efficiency, green building materials, and alternative energy sources like solar and wind power.
And those are definitely elements we're seeing in both of these PEI projects. It's great that the island is embracing these trends.
It is. I think it positions PEI well for the future. Communities like these are attractive to a wide range of people, from young professionals and families to retirees.
Makes sense. Now, I want to bring up something that's been on my mind. With all this focus on new development, what happens to PEI's existing communities? Are they being left behind?
That's a great question. And it's something that developers and policymakers need to be really mindful of. We need to make sure that the benefits of growth are shared and not just concentrated in these new developments.
So how do we make sure that happens? How can we make sure that the existing communities aren't overlooked?
Well, it starts with investing in infrastructure improvements and revitalization efforts in those communities, upgrading roads and public transportation, supporting local businesses, creating new parks and recreational facilities.
So making them just as appealing as the new neighborhoods.
Right. And it's also about creating better connections between the new and existing communities, extending those walking trails and bike paths, improving public transportation links, encouraging collaboration between different community groups.
But a network of interconnected communities, rather than isolated pockets of development.
Exactly. Thinking holistically, recognizing that all the communities on the island are connected. And of course, you can't forget community engagement. It's so important to involve the residents of those existing communities in the planning process for the new developments.
So they feel heard.
Exactly. It's about fostering a sense of partnership and ensuring that those new developments actually enhance the surrounding communities rather than taking away from them.
That brings us to our next topic, how you, our listeners, can get involved and help shape the future of residential growth on PEI. That's
Yeah.
right. It's not enough to just listen to us talk about development. You have a voice
Yeah.
and a stake in the future of your community.
Exactly. Whether you own a home or rent or own a business or just care about PEI, your perspective is important. These developments are all about creating spaces for people, and that means your needs, your dreams, your vision for the future, all of that should be a part of the conversation.
Okay, so how can our listeners actually get involved? What can they do to make their voices heard?
One of the most important things is to just stay informed, keep up with what's happening in your area, read local news articles, go to community meetings. The more you know, the better you'll be able to participate in the conversation.
So do your research. Stay in the loop. Don't be afraid to ask questions. What else?
Share your thoughts, your ideas. Contact your elected officials, write letters to the editor, participate in online forums, let people know what's important to you, advocate for more affordable housing options, support sustainable building practices, whatever matters to you.
Be an active citizen.
Exactly. You don't have to be an expert in urban planning to have valuable insights. What you experience in your community, those perspectives are important.
Before we wrap up, I want to highlight one more resource that might be helpful for our listeners, especially if you're thinking about buying or selling property.
Yeah, with the market changing so quickly, it can be hard to know where to start.
That's where our sponsor for today's episode comes in, Mike Montague RE/MAX, Charlottetown Realty.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, we want to leave you with this. PEI's future is being written right now, and you can be a part of it. Building a home, starting a business, just talking about the future you want to see. What you do matters.
So get informed, get involved, make your voice heard. The future of PEI is in your hands.
A big hello to everyone in PEI.
Hello PEI, and a big thank you to Mike Montague RE/MAX Charlottetown for making this deep dive possible.